You're listening to the Flourish Mindset, where we talk to entrepreneurs and discover their successes, their failures, and their secrets to winning at business. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Flourish Mindset. With me today, I have Maddie Craig with Cypher Bookkeeping. She is the founder of a remote working bookkeeping company. So welcome, Maddie.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about your company and what you guys do.
Yeah, so I started Cypher Bookkeeping as a bookkeeping-focused business. So we don't do any taxes, anything like that. We focus just on the day-to-day details for bookkeeping. So that's really where it started. I kind of was a grants manager in the nonprofit world on the other side of numbers. So now in bookkeeping, we do a lot of nonprofit bookkeeping and numbers for them. And really what we do is we keep all of the day-to-day numbers and things just organized so that business owners and nonprofits can really focus on the actual business or mission that they are trying to complete. So our goal is just to make that easier behind the scenes.
That's awesome. So do you work with like very specific tax companies and things like that? Do you have like those things kind of worked out for the clients that maybe need a little bit more extra help?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do always think that you should have a great tax preparer and then you should have a good bookkeeper. And sometimes they're the same person, sometimes it's somebody internal, whatever it is.
Sure.
So we work with the CPAs and the tax preparers at the end of the year we get everything ready for them and then we hand it off to them and then they help the clients with the year-end taxes, making sure all of their deductions and everything are in order. But when you've got kind of that triangle of you've got the business owner who knows their business and the industry and everything they're doing, you've got the bookkeeper who knows the day-to-day numbers, and you've got somebody for the tax planning, I think that's a really great combo. So we're always working with good CPAs and tax people that can help there too.
Absolutely. That's a phenomenal, getting that extra set of eyes and knowledge base there. So
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, tell me a little bit more about like what drove you to do this yourself.
So I was a grants manager at a private foundation. Yeah. So I was helping like hundreds of applicants every year basically walk through the process of applying for, receiving a grant, and then all of the follow-up reporting as well. And what I found in that role was that there were so many people that were doing great things in their nonprofit, but even when they would submit reports to try to get a grant or they're submitting the reporting afterwards, it wasn't always showing the details and the information that would help these grantors know like how much it really costs to put that program on or how much it costs to actually like do what they're doing every single day. So when I knew that I wanted to maybe go into business for myself and do something, that's where I saw the biggest need and where my strengths are, because I love numbers and I love just like putting together that puzzle, which is why I named my business Cypher, because I kind of see it all as a code and you get to like decipher all of that.
That's awesome.
So that's kind of what made me start into that. And really that's why I do what I do, is to help people tell that story of their nonprofit, tell the story of their business through like better organized financials in a way that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Especially because nonprofits, they want to tell that story of what they're doing with the money more than just, thanks for the money. We help people, like getting into more specifics, especially since that can help potential donors or grantors know that their money would be going towards something really specific too.
Absolutely. I think that's a hot topic, right? Don't donate your money here because they don't spend enough in the right areas. Yep. So having that like accurate data to really key in with the investors is awesome.
Yeah.
Great. And you started right before COVID hit, or was it 2019?
Yeah, yep. So right at the end of that year, and then I went full time with it, left my job and everything right in time for the pandemic.
Oh,
so
no.
Quite an interesting time to be starting a business, but it worked out well.
Well, I think there's probably a big need that happened right around then too, though. Someone who's capable of doing things digitally, but also really helping people dive in and key into their numbers so they knew how many people they could afford and where they could cut and all of those things too. Mm-hmm. I think it's so phenomenal that you did this, because then you maintained a remote company, which means you've hired remotely and you've really grown in that field, which I think is a big, scary thing for a lot of big businesses. And I know that we've all adapted to an extent with remote work, but a lot of people have that fear of, well, how do you know your staff is working for you? So can you tell me a little bit more about how you went about building your staff with remote work?
Yeah. So from the start, like with the business in general, I built it to be a completely virtual bookkeeping firm, which was kind of that different than your standard accounting firm like
Right.
idea that a lot of people had. But especially once the pandemic started, everyone had to work from home. And so suddenly all of the cloud-based things or the ways that we were streamlining processes made so much more sense for everybody because everybody was having to work that way too. So for me, like building the staff remotely too, it allowed me to tap into a lot more potential outside of just the demographic area, especially when you couldn't see people or go out for the most part during that time. So when I was like looking to hire, there's certain like bookkeeping programs or different certifications that like either I had gone through myself or I just knew had very solid foundations. So everyone that I hired was part of that, or like they've done different certifications. One of the big ones that all of my team members have to do if they're doing bookkeeping is they have to be certified in QuickBooks Online. And that's just because that's the main software we use. So making sure that people had the base level of that, I knew they at least had that. But hiring remotely, it is different because you don't get to see people face to face.
Right.
So one of the things that I did when I hired is I had people do like an intro video, like just something short, just something. So besides the resume that people can put whatever they want on, you get to see a little bit of the body language.
Right.
You get to see some of their features and just them talking naturally. So even though a lot of our work isn't face-to-face, like they might not be face-to-face with clients, I still want to make sure that they can communicate or that they feel comfortable having conversations with me virtually.
Right.
And that's kind of a big way that we stay connected too, is we've developed our communication channels and stuff like that to really kind of bring people together, even though we might not be in the same physical place.
Awesome. So what do you use? Do you use Slack or a different program?
Yeah, so we use Slack for like main communication, and then we also have like a project management system, and that's where like actual tasks and work is done. But Slack is the biggest one, and it definitely makes it easier to communicate.
So tell me, aside from communication, tell me a little bit more about how you have built up a culture or maintained a positive atmosphere, a positive culture within your team.
Yeah, so we kind of have a mix of contractors and employees.
Sure.
So it is a little bit different of how you need to treat employees versus contractors with some of those kind of things. But in general, like we have just a kind of a water cooler channel where people can just throw in random things or just even just like tips and tricks of things we found. Like as we were all kind of getting used to using Slack, it was like, hey, here's this cool feature I found. Like you can remind yourself about this. Just throwing it out there in case somebody else could benefit from that. And as we've started doing that, more people feel comfortable like sharing their own things. Like, hey, I noticed this this one day. Maybe this could help you with this. So kind of making that an open spot of it's not just all business or it doesn't have to be like all about the client work.
Right.
Really helps with that too.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you find that you have staff that are really just there to like come in, get the work done and leave? Or do you find that people really engage through the water cooler chat?
I think there's some element of like, sometimes it's just like, let's get things done, especially during the busier times. But I think everyone is pretty open and willing to talk. And that's something we're trying to facilitate a lot more this year because we only even just implemented Slack somewhat recently.
Okay.
And so it's something that we're starting to do is we want to build more of those connections of other people, and they have different contact points too, where it's not all just everyone talks to me.
Right.
Because I shouldn't be the main point of contact, like they should be able to find other resources or be able to talk with the other team members. So we're trying to facilitate that a lot more now.
Awesome. Okay. And have you maybe come across any lessons learned through hiring your staff remotely?
One thing is definitely like when you are hiring, because it is virtual, making sure that you're getting references or just also testing knowledge depending on what kind of job it is. Like bookkeeping is very specific. So something that I have a lot of the bookkeepers that come on do is some sort of test project or some sort of way that I can see if they can actually do things, because resumes can say whatever they want.
Right.
And even if somebody says I have experience in QuickBooks, well, it could be QuickBooks Online, it could be QuickBooks Desktop, it could be QuickBooks from 5 years ago, and that doesn't look the same necessarily. So I think that's one of the hard parts, is figuring out, is the experience relevant? Is whatever it is trainable? So I think one of the biggest things for me hiring, whether it's remotely or just in general, is the person trainable? Whether they have 10 years of experience or no years of experience, I'd much rather hire the person with less experience if they can learn the processes and systems better.
Right.
Because that's a huge part of our remote work, is that we have very clear systems and processes through the whole thing, and those have to be followed. And so if they can't follow that, and it's sometimes hard to tell if you're starting with somebody remotely, but if they can't handle that, then that's not the level of quality that we work with.
Right.
So finding a way to gauge that kind of experience, or what they're going to be able to handle from the start, I think is big. And then, I think that's kind of the big thing with remote hiring too, is how do you also continue to verify that they are continuing to do what they're doing? Because you're not in an office. You can't see if they're just, on their phone all day or whatever it is.
Right.
So I think that's a little bit harder to monitor, and it's finding that balance of not micromanaging, but also making sure that things are getting done.
Right. It's more basis on like tasks completed or projects turned in or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Awesome. I love that. And I love that you talked a little bit about it already, but making sure that their skill sets match and are trainable. I think that so many times when we talk about trainable, we ask maybe a few different questions in the interview process about trainability, but there is such a huge difference between somebody who is trainable, quote unquote, and somebody who, okay, well, like, let's say you don't know this, what would you do? And, oh, well, I would look up in this place and I would search here. And the people who are most like independent learners, where they'll like go and they'll try to figure it out themselves before they come to the manager and say, hey, how do I do this? But then also finding that balance of like, before you waste 6 hours researching this, like just ask or say, hey, can you point me in the right direction, so that they're not wasting so much time. So how do you find that balance between, like I said, trainable, but also independent learning?
Yeah. I definitely have some questions in like my interview process where I ask them, if you had this situation in a client's books, what would you do? Like, what would be your first 3 steps of how to solve that or find out something? As a team as a whole, like it used to just be me for a lot of the things because I was the one running everything.
Right.
But as my team has grown, I now have a couple people that help with like reviews or quality assurance. So now my team members have a couple more contacts that they can reach out to with questions. But the goal that I have is to, I can't remember where I heard this from, but they said it basically 3 before me. And it's the idea, before you have to talk to the CEO or to me, what are 3 different ways that you could try to either figure it out? Like 1, troubleshooting on your own. 2, looking at our resource documents and notes of our processes. And then 3, is there that supervisor or quality assurance person that you could ask? And then, if you are still stuck, then absolutely reach out to me. Like, it's definitely something where I want people to feel comfortable asking me questions. Because, you don't want people to feel like they're just running in the same place trying to figure something out, and then they've been doing that for 5 hours.
Right.
So I think we try to emphasize that balance of, we want you to go ahead and troubleshoot and try to, like, think for yourself of how would you handle this, and then, run that by your supervisor to say, this is how I think we should handle this, here's the situation, and they can kind of give that approval. But I always say, like, if it's taking you more than 20 minutes or 30 minutes to even, like, wrap your head around, absolutely just reach out. Just keep it easy. Like, it's not something that you have to struggle with on your own or, like, feel bad about asking for help with either.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. So you did talk about a little bit about supervisors. I think some of the biggest, scariest hires for a new company is the second person on. If it's not a partnership founding company, and then that first manager on. So tell me a little bit on how you made the decision when you were busy enough, like no longer were you just worried about yourself, but you were going to bring on another person, and now you had to worry about their salary. So what were the decision-making pieces on that first hire that you made?
Yeah, so one of my first hires was actually a virtual assistant. So I was able to kind of do it slowly, or kind of start with what I felt was manageable. Because, yeah, when you're a small business, you can't necessarily afford a whole nother salary.
Right.
A lot of times the small businesses, they can't even afford their own salary. Or they don't feel like, they don't
Right.
pay themselves,
For
a full
years
salary.
sometimes. Yep.
Yeah, yep. So how are you supposed to be able to now suddenly pay somebody else too? But hiring a virtual assistant allowed me to kind of set the terms from the beginning. And it wasn't that here's an entire employee. It was simply I needed support and I needed help in certain areas. And she was able to fill in some of that without me being like, okay, now I need to find 20, 30 hours of work a week for this person.
Right.
So for me, that was one of the avenues that I went of saying, I don't need a full-time person yet, but I still need some help and some support. So that worked for that level. And then once it was actually like, okay, now I need somebody who can actually do like operations work or somebody that is going to be an employee. You have to know your numbers. Like you really do have to be able to look at the investment that you're going to make in that and say, is this viable right now? And if it's not completely viable right now, can you save up so that you have maybe 6 months worth of like that payroll would be,
right?
And then go into that, because there is that trade-off of you are putting money into somebody that might not make you money, right? Especially if it's like an admin or bookkeeper or something like that. But is the time you're going to free up and the energy that you're going to free up to let you do more of that sales making, that could absolutely be worth it.
Yeah.
And maybe that does take a dip during that time period, but you should have at least a good cushion to know that you'd be okay for those months, even if they generate no revenue for the first few months as they're learning things. So I think it's that balance of you just kind of have to know your numbers and know what you're going to be comfortable with, and then see if you can find somebody that will fit into what you're comfortable with hiring for.
Absolutely. Love it. Okay, so that's the first steps. Moving into like a supervisory role, did you kind of do it in steps, kind of like the admin piece or the virtual assistant and then into a full-time? Or did you, where that maybe your first supervisor was maybe a bookkeeper and a supervisor mix? Or did you go into like a full-time supervisory role hiring where like their job was just to help everybody else?
Yeah, so it's kind of grown, and it's not something that like my kind of main like people aren't even full-time right now. And that's because the people that work with me are actually more like they like the flexible schedules. I have quite a few like stay-at-home moms. So, their schedules are never going to be where it allows for a full-time, 40-hour job or anything like that. But I am raising up people that have been working with me for a while. And it's absolutely because I feel like you do have to have that base foundation of our systems, our processes, even if they had experience in other things. Like the people that I've been able to watch grow in their roles, those are the people that I want to raise up in my company because they understand why we do what we do. They don't just do it. So that's really where the first person that I kind of approached about it, I just had an open, honest like conversation with her and said, hey, I think that you have really great skills and you've been doing a really good job. I'm looking at expanding and doing some other things, and I have these other opportunities. Would you be interested in that? Because here are the skills I'm seeing in you and the strengths that you have, and I want to help further that for you, but also for me too, because I think that our company could benefit of having you in a higher level role. So
that's great. I keep coming back to what you said about rise up, and I mean, you're really pouring into people, and in return, they're sharing your vision and your excitement, and pouring into your company too. So I think it's so phenomenal that you're putting them first and your clients first, and in return, it kind of feeds back for you. So how did you kind of communicate that vision, or is it just something that was just instilled in every time you interviewed, or how do you communicate that vision so that you have a shared direction with all of your staff?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that like I've been learning to say out loud more. So even just this last year, I finally kind of like actually wrote it down: mission versus vision versus purpose statement.
Right.
Because all three are kind of similar, but they're kind of different at the same time.
Right.
And I still even have to like think through what each of them means. But I feel like I've always tried to instill like, here's the purpose of our company, here's what we do, and not just here's the tasks of what we do, but why we do each thing. And I feel like the team members that I have been really good about asking me about that too, of like, why do we do it this way or whatever. But I've always tried to communicate that this is our purpose and my vision, and that I want not just me to succeed, but all of the team members and like everyone that is part of this. It's our clients. We're always client focused. We're always this. And just now, more recently, is when I'm kind of more setting that more clearly too, especially as people's roles have changed from, you know, somebody who was just doing bookkeeping is now going to be working with other people. Here's those different established roles. But really, again, that purpose of why we're having these roles.
Yeah.
Because it allows us to help clients better. It allows us to work better as a team. But yeah, in general, I feel like, you know, even if you just say you've got your vision and stuff, it is more the actions, right? It is more like you see that in that. Like one of the things for me is that I always wanted to take care of my team members. And I had a contractor who was a bookkeeper, and she was having a baby. And I was actually able to give her kind of like a paid maternity leave.
Oh, that's
even
awesome.
though, like, I didn't have to. Like, I wasn't required to. She wasn't even an employee. She was just a contractor that I really enjoyed working with, and I wanted to value her and have her come back, too, like, when she was ready.
Right.
So it's just those little things, I think, that really show people you care.
Absolutely.
Outside of just, you know, our vision is we want to have a good employee culture. Like, you can say that, but, you know, it doesn't mean anything until people actually see that and see it directly from the founder themselves, too.
Absolutely, living it out, living every piece of that out.
Yeah.
Awesome. Can you tell me a little bit about maybe who were some big influences in you starting your career and or deciding to branch out on your own?
Yeah. I would definitely say, like, one of my big influencers was my now husband. So we were actually only just, like, dating at the time, but I kind of told him, like, I felt like there was something more that I could do. Like, I wanted to make a more direct difference for people in this community. So when I was kind of like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, he was all for it. And so the fact that I had kind of that encouragement meant a lot, because it is very much, I was leaving a stable career. Like, I could have stayed in that job forever. I didn't hate what I was doing. So the idea that I would leave something so cushy as that to start something new, it was scary. So having people that were just like, you know, I do see this in you, and I know that you can do this. Right. I had a mentor at the time, too, who, when I told her that, she just basically laughed and was like, this absolutely makes sense, because this is absolutely who you are, and your strengths could be really utilized there. So, yeah, I feel like I got a lot of advice just from people. I reached out to business owners and just people that I looked up to, and asked if they'd be willing to grab coffee with me. And amazingly, a lot of them said yes. Yeah. And I just felt like that really helped solidify a lot of it.
That's so awesome. I think it's so important to have that amazing sounding board and support system. I think that when we start businesses, there's a lot of fear that we're treading on other people's territory, or that there's not enough business out there. But like, this is a growing world, and there is constantly new business to opportunities to open up. So that you identified people who are in business but still wanted to support you and lift you up is so phenomenal. And that's part of like learning here, and part of the podcast is like identifying, like, guys, there's probably 100 other people who have businesses who would be happy to share their information with you, and just making sure that you are reaching out and learning from everybody. I love it. So tell me a little bit about books and podcasts. What are you listening to? What are you reading? Or something that was really impactful that you read a while ago?
Yeah. So I do enjoy a lot of different podcasts, or just those snippets where, you know, you don't have like hours and hours necessarily, but if you can throw it on. One of the podcasts I've liked is called Ever Better. And it's by a gal who's an executive coach for founders and business owners. And she, like, honestly, her podcasts are like 10 minutes sometimes. They're super short, and it's just like, hey, did you think about this today? So I love those little things where, you know, like, everybody has their different style of what they like to listen to, but if it's just something that can get you thinking for the day, start out your morning. So I like that podcast a lot. There's a book called Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. That's a really good one. kind of on your mindset of business. I kind of see it as just like Dave Ramsey's envelope system, but for business.
Yep.
But it's just that whole idea of where is your money going, and do you know more than just my bank balance is positive and that's all you know? You know, are you thinking a little bit more strategically on that?
Yes.
And then I think there's so many good business books that you can read or listen to. One that I've enjoyed personally, like being a woman in business, is Playing Big. And that's just really good about talking about the mindset that a lot of us sometimes have, and the ways we hold ourselves back from playing big and from, stepping out. So that's one that I've really enjoyed lately.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, I think that we sometimes play into the stereotypes even when we don't have to. And it's totally unintentional a lot of times. It's subconscious, but like we're like, oh yeah, we can't do that, or oh, I don't want to rock the boat. So I love that. Okay. And part of the mission of this podcast is to help new entrepreneurs and give them maybe advice in starting out, but also helping them learn from other people's mistakes. So is there a lesson that you learned, a mistake that you made, a failure along the line that you think that would be really important for a new entrepreneur?
Well, one, I definitely didn't hire fast enough. It's that whole, you get stuck in like, you can do everything and only you can do everything. So I definitely recommend, don't think that way. Like, think from the start, I'm doing this now, maybe because I have to, right? If it's just yourself as a solopreneur, maybe you have to start that way. But you should be thinking or planning out, at least one thing I did from the start was I documented processes as if I was writing it for someone else.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that definitely helped when I brought somebody on.
Yeah.
But I still didn't bring someone on as soon as I could have, which I think would have helped me a lot. Just because I think sometimes we get trapped in the idea that only we can do this one thing, whereas realistically, pretty much anything is trainable.
Right.
Like clients will certainly come to you because of your specific skills or strengths, but you can train people, and you can start with the most basic stuff, like with my virtual assistant. Like, she just helped with emails and some of the simple stuff.
Yep.
But I think it's easy to just be like, it would take more time to train somebody, right? Like, it might take them an hour to do it, and it takes me 20 minutes to do it.
Right.
But the problem is then you've got all these 20-minute tasks.
Yes, exactly.
And if you had just taken that time to train them on that, you could have saved yourself so much time. And at some point, your time is much more valuable doing that.
Absolutely. And think of how much more business you could have brought in or done.
Yeah.
Do you follow like any of the like matrices, like the Eisenhower matrix? There's a few other ones, but like the urgent, important, the non-urgent, important. Do you ever do any of that?
Yeah, somewhat. I feel like I've like read a lot of these systems, and then I'll kind of incorporate them.
Like,
kind of like make it my own. But one of the things I did was, once I had a virtual assistant, she does go through my email for me and basically put it into, here's immediate stuff, here's, just an FYI, and here's stuff to do. But then that way I'm not checking my email like every second of the day, which honestly I still do sometimes.
It's rough.
It's hard. So that kind of helps. And then I have like kind of a weekly workflow of, here's what I've got for priorities for the day. If something comes up, obviously I can maybe switch things around, but it helps to kind of organize it that way a little bit.
Absolutely.
So I kind of try to do a little bit of that, but it is still like just writing everything down helps, I think.
Gotcha.
And then you can put it into priority lists.
Awesome. Yep. And I mean, that's kind of where I went with the matrix is, I know for me, identifying the things that are the most important that actually need all of my attention versus the things that aren't as important but do need to get done, and can I delegate that off to somebody else? And then, there's the non-important, but it also doesn't need to get done right away. Like, those are things like, if they're not important, they don't need to get done. Do we really have to do them at all? Like, is it really something that needs to get done? And just identifying, what can we delegate off? What can we do later? What can we put as a project? But yeah, like writing it down and then just putting it in your priority list based on like needs, so that you can pass it off more quickly, as opposed to holding on to the things. And I know there's other versions of it. Like Gino Wickman has one that kind of follows traction, that talks about like you love it and you're good at it versus like you hate it and you're bad at it. Like, why are you doing any of that? Yep. That goes back to the who, not how. Awesome. And if someone is starting, maybe they can't afford an accountant right away, what's the first thing that they should be getting or doing to make sure that they know their numbers in accounting, like in their company?
Well, definitely the first thing I always say is make sure you have a business account, like separate from your personal stuff.
Yes.
Keep it completely separate. And if you can, at least have some sort of, whether it's a written record or a spreadsheet, just write down every single transaction that's coming through. That's really the biggest thing is people don't even look at their bank accounts or see what transactions are coming in and out. And you'd be amazed that even sometimes the banks will make mistakes too. But it's absolutely how fraud happens and all that kind of stuff too, is when you're not seeing that come through. And it's a lot easier to, call up Best Buy or whoever it was and say, hey, there was an error or something that happened this last month, versus trying to call back when it's now a year later and no one remembers what that was.
Right.
So that's one thing, is separate out that business account and just keep everything, like records of that. And then I definitely still recommend that you really consider getting a tax preparer right away.
Sure.
Even if you're still doing the bookkeeping, business taxes are a whole different thing, a whole different ballgame. And I absolutely think that you should hire a professional for that.
Right.
So that would be the biggest thing, is doing that. And then there are still ways, something that we do sometimes will help people get set up and then just train them on how to do the basics. And so then you at least know, here's the stuff that I can do, and then here's the stuff, just leave that for your tax person, or at least, have a little list of questions for them.
Sure.
But if you can set yourself up with that solid foundation, when you are ready to hire that out or whatever, you've at least got something on the base, which is a lot easier to jump into and pick up when we have that, versus somebody that maybe hasn't tracked anything at all. And now it's year 3, and it's like, okay, how far do we need to go back and clean up or catch up or all that kind of stuff? So.
And that's not cheap either then.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
If there's the company that's going to need to be audited on a regular basis, they should probably have an accountant right away.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yep.
You don't want to make mistakes right away.
Yeah, yep. And nonprofits too, I would say, is a big one, of just make sure you've got records for everything, because you do have more people that are looking at you for the numbers. You've got a board. You probably have grantors or donors. And if they need that information, a lot of grants will ask specifically for reports after they've given you money, to make sure that, you are using it for what you said you're going to.
Right.
So I feel like nonprofits have even more pressure to make sure that they have very clear and transparent financials.
Absolutely. I think there's also some fear around, like, accountants cost too much, I can't afford it, but you guys are capable of growing with a company too. So, like, minimal services at the beginning, and then really elevate those services as the company grows, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, that's how we operate, is we know that, a tiny small business just starting out might have less than 50 transactions a month. We can serve those tiny ones, and then we've got clients that, need 10 reports a month and have tons and tons of transactions.
Right.
And we can meet them at that level. So it's finding out if there are services like ours or something where you don't necessarily need a full service in-house option for what you need. Can you just work with somebody like us to do part of it, or, and then see as it grows, okay, now I'm able to hand off invoicing or billing or some of those things that, I could do it and it was fine for me to do it, but now I can actually afford to pass that off and spend my time again, like finding more clients or doing something else that makes money.
Right, absolutely. It's the same thing. They need to delegate out. So,
yeah.
Okay, and when they're off interviewing accounting companies, what are maybe 1 or 2 questions that would be really important to ask?
Yeah, I mean, with like accounting firms and stuff, it's definitely one, do they like know your industry enough? Or, if it is a very specialized one, are they going to have experience in that?
Yeah.
The other thing is what software they use or how they will do your books. Like, for example, we only work with QuickBooks Online and some QuickBooks Desktop. But even the difference of how you enter things in QuickBooks Online looks entirely different in QuickBooks Desktop. So if they don't have experience in one or the other, but you're going to be using one or the other,
right,
you kind of want to make sure that they have experience in that, because accounting knowledge is definitely a basic must that people should have.
Yes.
But then the additional piece is that now there's all the software, and even though they make it easy, you still have to know what's going on behind the scenes to make sure things are working correctly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Love it. And I'm just going to tag on, this isn't even a question, but just because you hire an accounting firm does not mean that they're doing everything right away. So make sure you're holding them accountable, and it's okay to shop around if one's not working. Like, you don't need to stay loyal to them just because you hired them. So, it's the inspecting what you're expecting, even with your firms that you're hiring out, and then finding a good one is make sure you brag them up so that they can continue to grow too.
Yeah. Well, and I will add to that point is you should also, just because you're handing your books off to an accountant doesn't mean that you shouldn't be looking at your books anymore.
Right.
That's absolutely something where, for us, when we work with clients, they always have access to their books still, which isn't something that all accounting firms do.
Nope.
Which is
frustrating.
Up to people. Yeah, it is definitely up to choice with that. But if they're providing reports or something each month, you should be at least looking at that, because ultimately it is your business and you should know your numbers.
Yes.
We just help make it easier if you're not having to be in the weeds every day. You can just focus on the strategy, but you still got to be focused on that and looking at your numbers to make sure that things are looking correct, and doing that review.
Yeah. And it's not even just the correction parts of it too, but there's a whole story in those numbers like you talked about earlier, and it can project your future. It can tell you trends of what's happened in the past. You need to know those, and you need to study those so that you can better prepare yourself for the future and better prepare your company for growth or whatever needs to happen. So sticking your head in the sand and just trusting your accountants is not enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we are actually out of time already. I can't believe it just flies by. But if there's anything else that you could advise on our listeners, what would that be?
Good question. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You don't have to know everything. And I think that's something that when you're starting a business, it can feel overwhelming if you don't feel like you know everything, but it looks like everyone else knows what they're doing, But the truth is when you're a business owner, you now are wearing all these hats of you're suddenly having to be an accountant, you're having to be a hiring person, all these things that don't necessarily start with your why, because typically it's hey, I'm really passionate about something. I love doing this and I can get paid for it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But you've got all these other pieces in there, and it's okay that you don't know the other pieces, but you have to ask for help if you don't.
Absolutely.
Especially before you get too far down the road. So don't be afraid to ask questions. We've all been there.
Yeah.
And again, I did, I just asked people for coffee, and it was amazing how many people were so open and willing to talk, and just talk through their experiences. And that's, I think, what made a real big difference to me. So that's what I would say.
Absolutely. I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you, Maddie. If anyone wants to reach out to you, how can they do that?
So we have a website, www.bluecypherbooks.com. Otherwise, we are pretty active on LinkedIn and Facebook. So Facebook's probably a great one to follow us for tips and tricks and things that come up. So that would be the best way to reach out to us.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. And thank you, everyone, for listening in. You've been listening to the Flourish Mindset. Don't forget to subscribe and follow so you don't miss a single episode.